Hey guys, I'm back, and today we're talking Wrestlemania 17, in particular my memories with Wrestlemania 17 that I just want out there. I want to share with them and see if anyone else can connect with these memories I have of Wrestlemania 17. One of the greatest WrestleManias of all time. You know, you ask anybody their top 5 list, Wrestlemania 17 is usually in there, right? So let's get into it. Wrestlemania 17, wow. I had been watching wrestling for a number of years prior to Wrestlemania 17. I was still a young kid at the time, but my dad had owned a collection of VHS tapes that he's collected over the years of just pre-recorded Monday Night Raws. This was pre-DVR, folks, you gotta remember. So I would spend a lot of time just rewatching those. He had so many of them. And so my initial foray into wrestling was during the height of the Attitude Era, you know, the late 90s, the peak, the Monday Night Wars. A very exciting time to be a fan, especially as a young kid, because I would go to some events when, you know, it came to, you know, the Allstate Arena or what have you, Bradley Center in Milwaukee. I used to go up there from time to time. My mom was very cool to me at the time. She would bring me to all those wrestling events. And as a kid, just seeing like grown men and women just so into this thing that I also liked, it made me feel like an adult too, you know, and it kind of validated wrestling as a kid when you saw like how into it other adults were. So yeah, wrestling by 2001, April 1st, 2001, Wrestlemania 17 had already been, it had a hold of me. And I had watched obviously pre-recorded pay-per-views before then on VHS, but I had not seen a live pay-per-view before. So when Wrestlemania 17 came around, I was a crazed wrestling fan, and I remember just begging and pleading with my mom. I had shared this story on Reddit recently. I begged and pleaded with my mom to please let me order Wrestlemania 17, or order it on my behalf, obviously. You know, being a kid, I had no idea how to do it. And this was back during a time where if you wanted a pay-per-view, you had to call the local cable operator, talk to a real person, and order a pay-per-view. This is pre-WWE Network, pre-Peacock, folks. So you had to do stuff like that back then. And as a kid, that seemed like magic to me. I had no idea how that worked. And my mom said yes. And pay-per-views were expensive. Even back then, they were like 50, 60 bucks. You know, and that's over 20 years ago now. So she got it for me. And I'll never forget just sitting there in the basement, having the TV all to myself with WrestleMania 17 live playing on it. Just incredible stuff. The show from top to bottom was phenomenal. You know, this was the peak. This was like the culmination of years of the Attitude Era and the Monday Night Wars. WWF had just purchased WCW a few weeks prior to this event. So this was like the last hurrah that you were seeing of the Attitude Era. A lot of people, when you ask them when that era ended, a lot of them will point to WrestleMania 17. And you know, while the product might have been a little edgier afterwards still, and during the Ruthless Aggression era, which a lot of people say started in 2002, the next year, it definitely was still edgy, but you just did not get the same roster and the same feel and the same emotion, and the stakes weren't as high because there wasn't any competition other than interior competition. So WrestleMania 17 was a huge deal. And what can be said about the event itself that hasn't already been said? Just banger after banger after banger, as Sheamus would say. The whole pay-per-view was stacked. And I was a huge The Rock fan. Loved Stone Cold Steve Austin as well. You know, those two were both neck and neck. And it was babyface versus babyface going into it. You kind of had to pick a side, right? So I picked The Rock. I was firmly in The Rock's corner. He was the champion at the time. I really wanted him to retain. Obviously, it didn't go that way. And we could talk about the end of WrestleMania 17. A lot of people have their gripes with it. They think it shouldn't have ended that way. I mean, as a kid, I did not see that coming. And just the chair shot beating that Steve Austin put on The Rock, you know, with the help of McMahon. It was brutal back then. It's still brutal. It's even more so now when you look back at things. You know, they don't do things like chair shots to the head anymore and stuff. But Steve Austin really whooped The Rock's ass with that chair. And the match actually ended on those chair shots. You know, you don't see that too often. The chair shot, just, I remember Steve Austin. When I think of WrestleMania 17, I think of the main event. I think of Steve Austin just guillotining Rock repeatedly with that steel chair and just whooping on his back with it repeatedly. And man, it was just vicious stuff as a kid, and it worked. The heel turn for me worked because I hated Steve Austin after that. But you got to keep in mind, I was also a huge Rock fan, so of course I was going to hate Steve Austin for doing my boy like that, right? Now, Steve Austin was still so over in subsequent weeks, and that's a discussion for a different day. But I think the lasting impact, that visual at the end when the show went off the air, and you had JR on commentary saying, "Why, Stone Cold, why?" Shaking hands with the devil himself, Vince McMahon. That's the last thing you see as WrestleMania goes off the air, is Vince and Steve sharing a Steve Weiser. I loved it. And the show itself, like, packed in the middle, like, as a kid, TLC, seeing the Hardys and Edge and Christian and the Dudleys put on just that masterpiece of tag team wrestling. I was recreating that match for years with action figures after the fact. Me and my cousins would all get together, and we were insanely into the Hardys and the Dudleys and Edge and Christian too, man. It was insane. We would try to recreate some of those stunts in person too. Sometimes, obviously, we wouldn't put each other through tables, but just doing the flips and spearing each other from hanging off of things around the house. Yeah, I mean, what a time to be a fan. And then that hardcore triple threat match, which doesn't get talked about enough, between Raven, Big Show, and Kane. I love that match. And it went all around the arena, going through walls, going through windows. I remember Kane riding in the golf cart with the referee. It's just hilarious visuals. I love that triple threat hardcore match. The gimmick battle royal, for me, that was my first time seeing a lot of those legends. And I love that they brought out Bobby Heenan and Mean Gene Okerlund. It was great stuff, man. As a kid, to be able to see these legends that you heard mentioned all the time on TV was awesome. And Iron Sheik goes over at the end. I could talk all day from top to bottom about the matches. And WrestleMania 17, I can't say enough good things about it. When I look back on that event and what it meant, and that's the cool thing about wrestling, right? Because there are these moments that happen in time that you can go back to, and you can remember exactly how you felt at that time. You could remember the time period, what was going on outside of wrestling, and you can also look at it with like modern day perspective about these superstars, where they were in their careers and how what happened at those moments in time impacted the future where we are now. And there's so many people on that card that just aren't here with us today, and you get to see a lot of superstars when they were still on the rise. Like Eddie Guerrero was on that card, and Kurt Angle had obviously been champion already, but he was about to go on and do, Wrestling Machine, even better things in the Ruthless Aggression era. I think of Kurt Angle number one when I think of that era. But it's just, man, it was such a special time in wrestling. And it was when I was the most passionate, the most fervent I have ever been about wrestling. And I still am to this day, but I think WrestleMania 17, and like I mentioned at the beginning of the video, I had been a fan prior and watched wrestling events prior. I even watched pay-per-views prior, but I had never seen something the likes of WrestleMania 17. It established me as a hardcore wrestling fan for life. And I want to talk a little bit about the Astrodome too, because like I said, I had watched prior pay-per-views and WrestleManias, but they were not at the scale of WrestleMania 17 in the Astrodome. It was larger than life. I'll never forget when the pay-per-view went on air and seeing that massive sea of people. I think it was like 80,000 people in there. You're coming from WrestleMania 16, 15, 14, we were doing, arenas, like Madison Square Garden and, Rosemont and stuff like that. So when you get, and I know it sounds kind of silly now because we're so used to stadium shows, but WrestleMania 17 was the first time in a long time they had done something of that magnitude. You had WrestleMania 1, 2, 3, you had the Silverdome, you had the multiple venues and stuff like that. But then there was a hiatus from those big domes and arenas and stuff, stadiums, I mean. And to see WrestleMania 17, I can't stress enough how big a deal it was to have that many people in Texas, in Stone Cold Steve Austin's hometown. And to have him turn heel like that at the end was, man. And that's what I talked about earlier, about how you can look at that event in present day and with the knowledge that you have now and just kind of like appreciate it even more, in my opinion. But guys, WrestleMania 17, I just wanted to kind of gush about it a little bit. I could sit here and talk for hours about that event and about the year 2001 in general. But I just wanted to share my thoughts, my memories of WrestleMania 17. I want to know your guys' recollection of the event as well. I know for a lot of you it's your favorite WrestleMania of all time. Of course, it's mine as well. And there had been many WrestleManias that came after, but WrestleMania 17 will always hold a very special place in my heart. But yeah, guys, I'm back. I'm going to be making more WrestleMania recollections, maybe more wrestling recollection videos in the future. Take care, and as always, I'll see you guys next time.